No one really noticed Thomas when he walked down the aisles of Martin's Grocery at the edge of downtown. People barely glanced his way, assuming he was just another lost soul pushing an old squeaky cart that held his entire life. Thomas had once been a carpenter, a man with calloused hands and a warm laugh that filled rooms. But after a worksite accident and a stack of unpaid medical bills, life had stripped him of everything: his house, his family, his pride. Now he wore ragged clothes and carried a faded army jacket, a gift from a friend long gone. Yet Thomas was never bitter. He carried a quiet dignity and kindness that the world no longer expected from him. One rainy Thursday afternoon, as Thomas shuffled into the store to get a loaf of discounted bread and maybe a can of soup, he noticed a young woman standing at the checkout. Her name was Emily, a single mother of 2 small children, juggling a low-wage job and the weight of the world on her narrow shoulders. Emily's hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her eyes were tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying 1,000 worries that didn't let her breathe. On that day, Emily was frantically digging through her purse, her hands trembling as the cashier impatiently watched her. Her daughter, a little girl with bright eyes named Lily, clutched a small box of cereal, while her younger brother, Noah, played with a toy truck he'd found in a free bin. The total came to $47.32, a small fortune for Emily, who realized she was short by $12. She could feel the judgment from people behind her, some sighing loudly, others shaking their heads, and the cashier's eyes grew sharper as the seconds passed. Emily's face flushed red, her voice small as she apologized and began removing items, first the cereal, then a carton of milk, then the fruit she had promised to bring for Lily's class snack tomorrow. Each item she placed aside felt like a personal failure, and each of her children's disappointed looks crushed her spirit more deeply. Thomas watched this unfold, his heart heavy. He knew too well the sting of being invisible and the deeper ache of not being able to provide. Without thinking, he stepped forward, digging into his own worn pockets, pulling out a handful of crumpled bills and coins he had carefully saved over weeks. His hands shook as he placed the money on the counter and said softly, "Please, let her keep them." The cashier paused, staring at Thomas as if he were an alien creature, and the people behind them fell silent. Emily turned, her eyes wide and brimming with tears, unable to comprehend the kindness. "Sir, you don't have to," she began, but Thomas simply smiled, a gentle, almost fatherly smile, and shook his head. "We all need help sometimes," he whispered, his voice rough from years of shouting over construction machines, but now soft as a lullaby. The cashier reluctantly accepted the money, finishing the transaction, and Emily gathered her groceries, her hands trembling more than before, this time from gratitude instead of fear. She looked at Thomas, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words would come. Instead, she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Lily and Noah joined in, wrapping their tiny arms around Thomas's legs, their innocence radiating a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The moment hung in the air, timeless and powerful, as the rest of the store looked on, stunned into silence. After a few moments, Thomas awkwardly patted Emily's back, unsure of how to handle so much affection. He had been alone for so long, and now, in this small, bright moment, he felt seen, maybe for the first time in a decade. Emily pulled back, her cheeks wet with tears, and looked at him as if she had just seen a miracle. "Thank you. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Thomas shook his head again, his eyes soft. "Just promise me one thing," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "When you're able, help someone else. That's how we keep going." Emily nodded fervently, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't known she needed. As she left the store with her children, they waved goodbye to Thomas, who watched them walk out into the rain. He felt lighter than he had in years. Outside, Thomas sat on a bench beneath the awning, his bread and soup beside him, Rain splattered the concrete, and he closed his eyes, letting the cold drizzle wash over him, feeling, for a fleeting moment, like he had a purpose again. Inside, Emily loaded her groceries into her beat-up sedan, Lily humming a happy tune and Noah bouncing in his seat. As she buckled them in, she looked back at the store and whispered a silent thank you, a prayer for the stranger who had reminded her that kindness still existed. Driving home, Emily felt a renewed strength pulse through her. That evening, as she prepared dinner with all the groceries she had feared she'd have to leave behind, she realized how deeply that single act of kindness had shifted her heart. Lily watched her mother in awe, feeling the warmth of a meal and the glow of hope. Meanwhile, Thomas sat on his bench until the rain stopped, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he felt human again, his soul touched by the simple act of helping. He hadn't given Emily much in monetary terms, but he had given her dignity, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his own. That night, Emily and her children shared stories and laughter around the dinner table, laughter that had been missing for so long. Across town, Thomas curled up under his thin blanket in the alley he called home, a gentle smile on his face as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. He dreamt of warm homes and kind faces, of laughter and hugs, of being part of something bigger than himself. In a world that often pushed him aside, Thomas had given what little he had, and, in return, found a piece of his lost humanity. And that was worth more than all the money he would ever have. The next morning, Emily woke up with a determination she hadn't felt in years. The previous night's dinner had been more than a meal. It had been a spark. She looked at Lily and Noah as they ate breakfast, cereal and fruit, the same fruit she almost left behind, and she felt an unexplainable warmth in her chest. She knew she had to do something to honor the kindness of the homeless man who had stepped in when no one else would. After dropping her kids at school, Emily returned to Martin's grocery, her eyes scanning every corner, hoping to find Thomas. But the bench was empty, the awning clear of any trace of him. She asked around, describing him to cashiers and customers, but they all shook their heads. Some didn't even remember what had happened the day before. People were always in a rush, moving through life too quickly to see the silent miracles happening around them. Feeling a mix of sadness and resolve, Emily decided to look elsewhere. She drove around town, checking under bridges and at shelters, her heart heavy but hopeful. Meanwhile, Thomas wandered the city streets with a new kind of energy. The encounter at the grocery store had unlocked something in him, something long buried under layers of disappointment and pain. He found himself smiling at strangers, helping an elderly woman carry her groceries, sharing his bread with another homeless man named Jake, who had become a quiet friend over the years. Jake noticed the change in Thomas and asked, "What's got into you today, old man?" Thomas just laughed, a deep, hearty laugh that startled even himself. "Kindness," he finally answered, "just kindness." Jake shook his head but smiled too, a rare sight that softened the harsh lines of his weathered face. The day went on, and as evening approached, Thomas found himself back near Martin's grocery, as if pulled there by some invisible thread. Emily, exhausted and defeated after a long day of searching, returned to the store one last time before picking up her kids. She nearly dropped her keys when she saw Thomas sitting on the bench, staring at the sunset like it was a masterpiece painted just for him. She rushed over, tears already blurring her vision. "I've been looking everywhere for you," she exclaimed, breathless. Thomas turned, surprised but delighted, his eyes crinkling with a warmth that melted Emily's heart. "Why would you look for me?" he asked softly. Emily sat beside him, struggling to find the words. "Because," because you changed everything for me yesterday. You didn't just help me buy groceries. You made me feel seen." Without thinking twice, she stepped in and paid for his groceries, her heart swelling as she remembered Thomas's words. "When you're able, help someone else." Her children watched her with wide eyes, and Lily asked later, "Mom, why did you do that?" Emily smiled and knelt down. "Because we help people when they need it, sweetheart. That's how we make the world better." Lily beamed, hugging her mother tightly, and Noah joined in, creating a small circle of love in the middle of their kitchen. Thomas watched from afar as Emily blossomed into someone stronger and more compassionate. She began organizing small food drives, leaving meals for those in need, and slowly her community started changing too. People began to greet each other more warmly, to look out for the elderly neighbor, to offer a helping hand instead of turning away. Thomas continued his quiet life, but he was no longer alone in spirit. Every time he passed by the store, he would see small notes left for him. "Thank you for reminding us to be human. You are a blessing. We see you." Each note was like a small lantern in the darkness, guiding him forward. In time, a local nonprofit organization offered Thomas a job maintaining a community garden. It wasn't much, but it gave him a purpose and a safe place to sleep. He accepted gratefully, and for the first time in years, he had a key to a small shed where he could keep his few belongings. The garden became his sanctuary, a place where he could work with his hands again, nurturing plants and watching life grow from the soil. Children would come to learn about gardening, and Thomas taught them patiently, his eyes shining when they proudly showed him their first sprouts. In those moments, he felt like a teacher, a protector, and above all, a human being worthy of respect. Months passed, and the town's atmosphere changed subtly but profoundly. The grocery store set up a kindness jar at the checkout, where people could contribute to help those short on cash. Inspired by Thomas and Emily's story, more neighbors began volunteering at shelters and donating warm clothes during the winter. Emily, seeing this ripple effect, started a small community group called Hands of Hope, organizing monthly drives and kindness challenges. She made sure her children were involved, teaching them that true wealth was measured not by what you had, but by what you gave. Thomas continued to live simply, but each day felt fuller than the last. He still wore his old army jacket, now patched in places by volunteers who had come to know and care for him. He still loved to watch the sunset, but now he often had children sitting beside him, asking questions about plants, life, and kindness. He told them stories about his past, about mistakes and redemption, about how a single act of kindness could change the entire course of a life. When asked if he regretted anything, he would pause and smile softly, then say, "Everything that happened brought me here, to this bench, to this garden, to you. So no, I don't regret a thing." His words carried a weight that lingered in young hearts long after they left. One afternoon, as Thomas was tending to some tomato plants, he saw Emily approaching with Lily and Noah. Emily looked radiant, her eyes bright with gratitude and strength. She handed Thomas a small potted plant, a young sunflower. "We wanted you to have this," she said. "It reminds us of you, strong, bright, and always turning toward the light." Thomas felt his eyes water as he accepted the plant. He placed it in a sunny corner of the garden, promising to care for it as if it were a child. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in fiery colors, Thomas sat beside the sunflower, feeling the warmth of community and love surround him. He looked up at the sky, his heart full, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for riches or comfort, but for connection, for the simple, unyielding power of kindness. And in that moment, Thomas knew that even a man with nothing could become a beacon for an entire town. As summer melted into autumn, Thomas's garden became a local sanctuary where laughter of children mixed with the gentle rustling of leaves. The once forgotten homeless man was now at the heart of the town's new spirit of compassion. Schools began organizing field trips to the garden, and teachers spoke of Thomas's story as a lesson on humility and kindness. One crisp morning, Thomas received a letter from a local high school principal, inviting him to speak at an assembly. At first he hesitated, overwhelmed by fear and self-doubt, but Emily encouraged him, reminding him of how many lives he had already touched. When the day arrived, Thomas stood on the auditorium stage in his patched army jacket, facing hundreds of young faces. He shared his journey, his failures, and the simple act that had changed everything. He spoke of human dignity and the invisible battles people fight every day. His words flowed not from a polished speech, but straight from his heart. And the students listened, captivated. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Many students lined up to hug him, tears shining in their eyes. A few days later, a local news station covered Thomas's story, broadcasting it far beyond their small town. Messages began pouring in from across the country, people sharing how they had helped strangers. Donations arrived for the garden, enough to build a small greenhouse and start a seed-sharing program for low-income families. Thomas watched all this unfold with quiet wonder. Meanwhile, Emily's Hands of Hope group grew stronger, spreading kindness throughout neighboring towns. She often visited Thomas to share updates, always bringing Lily and Noah, who had grown especially fond of him. One late autumn evening, after a busy day of gardening workshops, Thomas sat alone under the golden sky. The sunflower they had given him now stood tall, a living symbol of resilience and light. As he traced the sunflower's leaves, he thought of his daughter and felt that somehow, through all the mistakes and losses, he had finally found redemption. He closed his eyes, a serene smile softening his lined face. In the coming weeks, Thomas felt his health declining. He moved slower, needed more rest, and the townspeople noticed. They rallied around him, taking turns helping in the garden and bringing warm meals. Emily visited more often, sitting with him and sharing stories, ensuring he never felt alone. One particularly cold evening, Emily found Thomas dozing by the sunflower. She placed a warm blanket over his shoulders and gently squeezed his hand. He opened his eyes and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me, for reminding me that I mattered." Emily, with tears in her eyes, replied, "Thank you for teaching us what it means to be human." That night, Thomas passed away, peacefully, under the stars, his heart full of love and peace he had never imagined possible. The next morning, the town woke to the news of his passing. People gathered at the garden, leaving flowers, notes, and small tokens of gratitude. Emily and her children stood by the sunflower, now surrounded by candles, and promised to keep Thomas's spirit alive through every act of kindness they could share. The town held a memorial service where stories of Thomas's generosity and warmth echoed through every corner of the hall. In the end, Thomas had no riches, no mansion, no worldly success. But he left behind a legacy far greater, a community transformed, a generation inspired, and countless hearts awakened to the power of a simple act of kindness. His story spread far beyond their town, inspiring people worldwide to see the invisible, to love the forgotten, and to understand that true wealth is measured not by what you keep, but by what you give. And so, in the soft glow of twilight, with the sunflower standing strong and golden, the town of Martin's Grocery carried forward Thomas's memory, living proof that one broken man with nothing but a kind heart can change everything.